thank you. It's another day where no one's talking about it, but we will. The shutdown. Anybody care that the government shuts down in less than 2 weeks? That's a week from Friday. If you're playing along on your home game, March 1st is when it begins. March 8th is when it is complete. And there's no budget. There's no plan for a budget. They're not writing spending bills unless something emerges from this recess that blows our minds. There won't be a compromise likely to pass them either. And so it becomes a question of either, as Tom Emmer told us last week, the majority whip, we do this in mini buses, as we like to call them in Washington, not to be confused with omnibuses, or we just actually shut down. And that might be the case because Mike Johnson, of course, is being threatened, as his predecessor was, with being fired if he does that very thing. We were told no more stopgaps, no more CRs. And Nathan Dean is watching this from his perch at Bloomberg Intelligence. The BI Policy Watch, U.S. government shutdown impacts. When Nathan starts to try to figure out what's going to happen if we shut down, that means we're probably closer to shutting down. And he's with us right now. Nathan, good to see you. Where are we as we enter this new week here, this week of recess? Knowing that there'll only be 3 days when we come back, is the conventional wisdom that we are, in fact, finally shutting down in March?
No, I don't think so. I mean, we have a low chance of a shutdown for that reason that you just said. We only have 3 days. And also remember, when the Senate comes back, they have to deal with the impeachment of the DHS secretary. Now, I think Senator Schumer is going to say, look, let's focus on the shutdown and not that. But there's one thing that Congress has been able to do this year. It's called kick the can down the road. Mm-hmm. And I honestly think, despite the fact that Speaker Johnson is going to have this vacate motion threat, he's had this before, he's called their bluff. I think he'll call their bluff one more time, and then they'll kick the can maybe to April or after the Easter holiday. The one thing that we should just always remember to tell our clients, and this is what we do, is that, and I've said this before in the program, is that scary headlines associated with shutdowns don't equate to scared markets. Mm-hmm. This is something that the market has seen before. This is something they're going to see again. The one date that we are telling folks that they should be paying attention to is April 30th, because if we're still operating under a continuing resolution at that time, we have an automatic 1% sequester cut to everything, including the Department of Defense.
That's right. You are pointing out in your piece today, the large contractors will be protected during short-term shutdowns. So not advancing all the way to the sequester, but if there were an interruption here of days or weeks, the Lockheeds, the Boeings, the Raytheons would not be damaged by it.
That's correct. I mean, obviously there's headline risk that could be associated with, but these large contractors have projects that are funded multiple years. Mm-hmm. Who's impacted? Smaller contractors that have smaller term contracts, or contractors that are automatically furloughed in a shutdown. They usually don't get the back pay, unlike government workers. And then also, if you're in the process of working with the government on trying to secure a new funding contract, if the government shut down, and remember, in this case, it'd be 4 out of the 8 go on March 1st, the rest go on March 8th. So if you're working with the Department of Agriculture and they shut down on March 1st, they're not going to answer their phone and you're just going to be delayed.
Got it.
The one thing that contractors are paying attention to, on the other hand, is the Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan funding, where depending on that funding level, you could see 1 to 3 to 4% revenue growth over the next few years. Now, I think that Senator Schumer, when he comes back, will say, you know what, we're going to offer the House a funding deal just to kick the can down the road, but there is a chance that he may say, we're going to offer a funding deal and we're going to include Ukraine and Israel and Taiwan aid. If he does that, the odds of a shutdown go greater because Speaker Johnson now gets put into a political corner where President Trump is going to get involved. And so, a lot of things can happen there. We are optimistic that Ukraine aid is going to happen by April 30th, but the pieces are going to be kind of hard to predict exactly when that's going to happen.
Why are you optimistic when we hear the not another dollar cry from the Freedom Caucus crowd and so much discord over the way this has gone so far? The border on again, off again. We saw the Senate pass something, but it doesn't have a path in the House, does it?
No, it doesn't have a pass in the path in the House. Now, the reason why I'm optimistic on the Ukraine aid is because this is one of those issues where I think if you were to give most of the people in Washington truth serum, they'd say, look, we're in favor of this. Now, there's political angles that have to come into play here. But ultimately, when Senator Schumer usually sends these deals to the House, he does it in a way that entraps the Speaker and forces the Speaker to make a decision. Because I think the American populace would be on the side of saying, look, a deal that has funding issues plus the Ukraine-Israel aid is somewhat popular. So I think if there's a political argument here, and just remember, we are in an election year, I think this is something that Speaker Johnson is going to have to play ball on and eventually just figure it out. Maybe they'll give him some political wiggle to, get out of this. But ultimately, if they don't get the Ukraine aid, this plays into President Biden's hands even further, like we saw with the border security deal. He'll come out, make more speeches, and again, turn this into an election issue.
This is great analysis as we spend time with our friend Nathan Dean from Bloomberg Intelligence. Something very important that you said, Nathan, and if you're just joining us, I want to point people's attention to April 30th. We're talking about a potential shutdown here in March. Nathan doesn't see it happening. BI has its own reasoning and logic for that. If we head to that sequester, though, Nathan, if that across-the-board cut does happen at the end of April, what happens to these same contractors we're talking about here? Because that would indicate to me that cuts are coming, and that supplemental may not have passed at that point as well.
Yeah, if we get that April 30th sequester, these contractors are going to have a tremendous issue that they're going to have to work with. The reason why we don't think that's going to happen, though, is because the Department of Defense is involved. This isn't just any type of agencies where the Republicans or Democrats can pick on that agency and say we don't like what's happening there. It's the military, and it's obviously the military in a time where geopolitics is extremely important. So I think what will happen is that the contractors could have some headline risk going up into that date. And look, nothing happens in Washington until people are pushed back into political walls, and they may not happen until April 28th or April 29th. Yeah. But eventually, we do think something will actually come to fruition, and they'll get a deal done.
The Hawks are going to freak out if we get to that point. That's not going to come easily, Nathan. When you consider an across-the-board cut to defense funding at a time like this, we may be obsessing a little bit more over these defense contractors than some other folks who would be impacted by a shutdown. But the sequester goes right to the heart of the Armed Services Committee and the need to enhance, not cut, Pentagon funding, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And not only doesn't it just Department of Defense, but you're talking Treasury, Commerce, Ag. So they're not even the large defense contractors, but even just anybody who's working with the government and relies on government spending as part of their revenue base is going to be impacted. We saw what a sequester threat did several years ago. And look, I don't think there's anybody in Washington who wants this done. So the question is, can cooler heads come together and avoid a sequester? Now, who makes the rules? Congress. Who can come together and kick the can down the road? Congress. So if we get to April, call it the ultimate kick the can down the road bill. Maybe they say, okay, we're going to have a continuing resolution, but it just goes beyond the fiscal year date. Anyway, I'm just making things up here. But, I think ultimately Congress will be able to figure this out. Nobody wants to have this fight in an election year, not even folks that want to turn this political. And I think Speaker Johnson, Senator Schumer, Senator McConnell, and the White House can all come together, and they may be holding their thumbs and their noses when they do this, and they may say that this is something that they're against, and ultimately you may need more Democratic votes than Republican votes to get it through the House. But I do think that something will come together. They'll find a solution, and both sides will be able to say that they win politically.
We cannot spend time with Nathan Dean at Bloomberg Intelligence without asking him about cannabis. This is always on your radar, and this is an interesting one as we wait for rescheduling potentially. Nathan, I'm just bringing this up because the FDA put out its fiscal year drug safety priorities report on Thursday, highlighting the rationale that it's using and the research that it conducted here to lead it to recommending rescheduling. What's going on with this? Is the DEA listening?
So we actually have heard rumors that the DEA is almost imminently going to release its reschedulization decision. Now, I should state these rumors have happened before, so we don't actually pay attention to the rumors. But what we do know is that we do think that there is a high chance, a 70% chance, that the DEA is going to say, let's move this from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. Now, what's going to happen to these marijuana equities when that happens? Well, the primary relief here was what's called 280E tax relief. And it moves your tax base or your tax rate effectively from about 40% to around 5 to 15%. So a lot more cash is going to come back into these marijuana equities. Now, in terms of processing Catalyst, you're going to have that decision, but then also on that same day or probably the next few days after, they're going to put out a proposal. So it's not going to be set in stone. This proposal will have a comment period, finalization, but ultimately you will know that that tax relief is coming. Things like decriminalization legislation, that's just not going to happen anytime soon.
There's nowhere else you're going to hear this kind of specific analysis on these stories. Thank you, as always, Nathan. I wish I was there with you. Nathan Dean in Washington, policy analyst, senior policy analyst at Bloomberg Intelligence.